launch of survey results, Rights and Living Conditions of Travellers in Ireland. I'm Anastasia Crickley, your chair for this morning, and my first very pleasant duty is to introduce Carol Baxter. Carol is Assistant Secretary General at the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, where she leads on implementation of policy on gender, equality, including travellers and Roma, integration and refugee services. But in particular this morning, I want to introduce Carol as a committed person, a person who's very committed to equality and who's gone the extra mile to support so many groups concerned with rights and equality, so many groups working on these issues, and in particular who's taken a very consistent interest in traveller and Roma concerns. Carol, over to you to welcome us all.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. I'm delighted to be here this morning to welcome you all to the launch of the Fundamental Rights Agency's Travellers in Ireland report, which, as you say, sets out the key results for Ireland of the Roma and Traveller Survey 2019. The speakers this morning will discuss the findings of this report, which sets out the traveller experiences in relation to a range of areas: education, employment, health, accommodation, and the continuing experiences of discrimination. Minister Roderic will talk about the government action to address these issues. As you're aware, Minister O'Gorman has taken responsibility for Traveller and Roma policy, and as such is responsible for the coordination of the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy, which is the cross-government strategy for action on Traveller and Roma issues. He's also responsible for equality legislation, and as such, the key challenge is ensuring that that legislation is sufficiently robust to address discrimination against travellers and to enable travellers to vindicate their rights. This is an important report and an important event this morning with a very impressive line of speakers whom Anastasia Crickley will now introduce. Anastasia herself needs no introduction, but it's useful to remind you all that Anastasia has been a founder member of Pavee Point, the first chair of the Fundamental Rights Agency, the chair of the UN Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination from 2016 to 2018, the member of the Advisory Committee of the Council of Europe's Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, and very pleased to say the current member of the government's Anti-Racism Committee, which has the very important mandate of advising the government in terms of what needs to be done now to address racism in Ireland. So I'm delighted to hand over to Anastasia, and I hope that you all find this webinar important, thought-provoking, and giving us a mandate for action on Traveller and Roma issues.
Thank you very much, Carol, and welcome again to everybody. Our first speaker this morning, as Carol has outlined, will be Michael O'Flaherty. Michael is current director of the Fundamental Rights Agency, and he has a long and distinguished history, I would say, both as an academic and a global human rights champion. From the UN, where he blazed a trail, not least as vice chair of the UN Treaty Body on Civil and Political Rights, to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, to the Galway Irish Centre for Human Rights based at University College Galway. Today, in particular though, I would like to say to Michael, welcome home, and thank you for FRA's commitment to travellers and Roma, which led to this very particular and very unique survey, the first time that Irish travellers have been particularly focused on in one of the EU MIDAS surveys, so very well undertaken by FRA. Thank you for undertaking this sort of research that can make a difference, as this 6 countries study indicates. And thank you for the clear recommendations you have made for the 2020-2030 EU strategic framework based on the study. Michael, the floor is yours.
Anastasia, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for welcoming me home. I really wish I was home today, but we have to work with what we have under the extraordinary circumstances. Let me begin, though, of course, by thanking our co-hosts today, Pavee Point, the Department for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. And we're so pleased that Minister O'Gorman is with us. And as well, of course, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. Thank you all for co-hosting this event, which is very important in the life of the Fundamental Rights Agency. It's important for us because it marks the completion of the gathering of the evidence about the experience of Roma and travellers across all the EU member states. As Anastasia said, we focused on 6 countries for this study, but the importance of that is it completed the story for all 27. And EU-wide, I'm afraid there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's a grim story. It's a story of profound underachievement of strategies. And of course, today the focus is on the particular experience of travellers in Ireland. The interviews were conducted in 2019. The evidence, the data was gathered in 2019 through the form of in-depth interviews with 518 travellers across the length and breadth of the country. Now, the details will be presented in a few moments. My colleague Ursula will speak to the findings. I would like to just flag a few of the headlines that caught my eye in the Irish findings. In the first place, we have in Ireland one of the worst experiences of discrimination in the EU, with 65% of the respondents saying that in the past year they had experienced a form of discrimination. A shocking 70% of 18 to 24-year-old travellers are not in further education in Ireland. That's shocking, and it's all the more so when you match that figure to the general population not in further education, 5%. We have, I'm afraid, in Ireland some of the worst adult employment rates in the EU. Just 17% of women and 13% of men reported that they were in employment, and most of those in either part-time and or precarious employment. And of course, I don't need to say anything in this group today about the very worrying housing situation. And among the statistics there, 73% of the interviewed travellers said that they had experienced some form of housing-related discrimination. Now, the story goes on past 2019, of course, and the Fundamental Rights Agency is closely following the impact of COVID-19 on Roma and travellers across the EU. I'm sure we'll come back to that in discussion today in the Irish context. Let me just say, EU-wide, that Roma and travellers are experiencing a perfect storm of human and fundamental rights deprivation and challenge in this extraordinary year of 2020. Now, not all the news is grim. The Irish data shows up some encouraging signs. Again, Ursula will come back to them. I'll just mention 2 that caught my eye. The first is that EU-wide, travellers in Ireland have a relatively high awareness of where to go with discrimination complaints and the existence of equality bodies. It's about 50% of people say that they know where to go and that an issue of discrimination arises. Now, 50% you might say is not great, but it's notably better than in some other EU countries. And also, travellers in Ireland are more willing to complain about experiences such as of discrimination than is the case EU-wide. In some places, almost nobody brings a complaint. In Ireland, it's almost a third, 28%. Now, again, a third is unacceptable, but we have to match it against the extremely low figures in some other places. So what to do? Anastasia mentioned our suggestions and proposals contained in our report. I would just like to flag very briefly 5 issues. The first is, and gosh, you know, if you come from Galway like me and you grew up in Galway in the 70s and the 80s, you don't need to be told that the problem of the experience of being a traveller in Ireland is not the fault of the travelling community, it's the fault of all of us in the settled community. We have to acknowledge the deep-rooted racism that still lies in our societies, and that's going to be the fundamental element in improving the experience of travellers. Secondly, And again, this is a lesson learned from our work everywhere in the EU. And that is, it's obvious, but it's got to be said, that it's not about working for the Roma and traveller communities. It's working with the Roma and traveller communities, and not some kind of tokenistic form of participation, but a meaningful going the journey together. And that brings the results. And if we don't do that, efforts fail. Third, and again, this is a deep learning of the agency for years now, we've got to go local. Sort of generalized or homogenized strategies that tackle the whole country as if every village is the same don't work. And we've got to drill down in our efforts into local communities with local travelers to find the right fixes and the right ways to strengthen the experience in our societies. Fourth, and again, I learned this in Pavee Point and elsewhere. I spent a wonderful morning in Pavee Point a little bit over a year ago. And again, there was very strongly brought home to me, not for the first time, but very powerfully, the fantastic traveller culture and how we as a society, in this case, Irish society, we have to learn about traveller culture and celebrate it as one of the great riches of our society. Again, I think we have such a long way to go here. And by the way, let me just say in passing, one dimension of traveller culture, which is under-acknowledged outside the traveller community, is the absolutely central significance of the horse for traveller life and society. And that has to be acknowledged also in terms of housing initiatives and other efforts. And then fifth and finally, we had just a few weeks ago the rollout of a major new EU strategy in support of Roma and travellers, the so-called strategic framework. This is different, better, stronger, clearer, more focused, more targeted than previous EU efforts, but it'll only succeed in a close collaboration with the member states. And so I'd like to suggest that today can be the opportunity to very powerfully acknowledge and commit to that partnership of EU and Ireland to engage this most pressing and troubling situation of the life experience of our brothers and sisters in the traveller community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. I think we all agree that today is a very particular moment. And before going ahead now to hear a little bit more about the results, during the next period, we will hear about the results and we will also hear about participation in the research. But before doing that, I would like, in thanking you, to thank all who made today possible, all of the people who've helped technically to create the conditions for today, but in particular to thank all those 580 people you spoke about who courageously participated in the study in Ireland and to share their information and information with regard to their families and the people with whom they were residing. I would also like to thank all of the people involved with the research and the Ipsos research group who also supported it in Ireland. Now, so that you get a better idea of the findings though, and of the findings from Ireland, I'm next going to invite Ursula Till-Tentschert, who is Deputy Head of FRA's very core Technical Assistance and Capacity Building Unit, but in particular on this occasion was Project Manager for the Roma and Travellers Study, to give us an overview of the findings. I would like also to remind everyone that Ursula has a very long-standing commitment and concern about the conditions of Roma. She's published a number of articles and she's been involved in a number of positions, in particular with regard to statistics in the Austrian Statistical Office over the years. Thank you to Ursula and to her colleagues, not just for this research, but also for the approach that you took to it, the way you were prepared to partner and ensure that it was a peer enterprise, and also to the way in which you have been engaged with us during the period that you were doing it. Now, the way we're going to do this is that there's going to be a short video, a 3-minute video to follow now immediately, and that will be with a briefing sheet on the Irish results, and that then will be followed by Ursula, who will address us about the key survey findings in Ireland. Thank you.
many Roma and travellers endure shocking hardship and inequalities in the Europe of today. To find out more, the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency surveyed Roma and travellers in 6 European countries, including Ireland. We asked 518 travellers in Ireland about their life and experiences of discrimination. The results are worrying, particularly in Ireland, where overall discrimination is one of the highest across all surveyed countries.
Most travellers between age 16 and 24 don't have jobs and have very little chance of getting one. We need policies and actions to increase travel employment, which will reduce discrimination and racism against travellers.
In fact, 38% felt discriminated against when looking for work, and only 17% of women and 13% of men have paid jobs. This is much lower than the national rate. Then when it comes to housing, 92% of travellers say that there are not enough places for them to live, especially appropriate halting sites. Not only that, over 2/3 of travellers felt discriminated when trying to rent or buy a place to live.
It would be good to see traveller accommodation issues are fixed, so that there will be less stress and worry for me and for my family.
When it comes to poverty, about 31% of travellers live in a household that cannot afford basic items such as food and heating. This is 6 times more than people generally in Ireland. As for education, 70% of young travellers only complete the junior cycle of second-level education, compared to 5% of young Irish people generally.
As a traveller woman studying in Maynooth University, I know despite a lot of racism on all educational levels, travellers still want to go on to third-level education.
Travellers in Ireland experience high levels of racism and discrimination in all areas of life, and inequalities at work, education, housing and health lead travellers to living much shorter lives than people generally in Ireland.
In 1986, for the first time, we learned that travellers died a lot younger than settled population in Ireland. And now it's 2020, we know travellers are still dying at a younger age than the settled population.
This calls for Ireland and the EU to continue working with traveller organisations to find lasting solutions to end long-standing poverty, low employment and ill health, while still allowing travellers to enjoy the right to their culture, including nomadism.
So, hello, everyone. Yes, I would like to thank you for this invitation. And I would like to particularly thank Pavee Point and all the travelers who have worked hard to make this event possible today, but not only this event, but who made this survey possible. And I think in the case of Ireland, we have a model of how we could do surveys together with the populations we want to survey and not about the populations. And I'm very happy to present you some of the results, the key results on the situation of Roma and travellers in Ireland today in comparison with other survey countries. It's the first time that we have comparable data on travellers between countries, and also in comparison with the general population, where we try to collect data which are comparable with the Eurostat key indicators for the EU. The Fundamental Rights Agency collects data since 2008 on Roma, And it is the first time that we collect data now in the 6 Western EU member states. UK at the time was still part of the EU. So in total, we asked about 4,700 respondents and collected information about discrimination, about their living situation in the areas of health, housing, employment and education. And we ask this always based on self-identification. So the participation in the survey was voluntary and always based on the self-identification. It was spread out throughout Ireland, the interviews, and is therefore representative, and the fieldwork took place in March between March and July 2019. It was not easy to reach out to the traveler communities, and it would have not been possible without the close collaboration with the travelers and with their support. So in total, we actually worked with 45 traveler interviews, and Anastasia mentioned it already. Ipsos Mori was the contracted company in Ireland with 28 non-traveler interviews, but they had support by traveler interviews. The survey, of course, complied with our high quality standards, and the results will serve also as a baseline for the new EU Roma strategic framework until 2030. We heard it already, discrimination was the highest in Ireland, with 2/3 of travelers who felt discriminated, but also about half experienced some form of hate-motivated harassment in the last 12 months, and 7% reported that they experienced hate-motivated violence, physical violence in the last 12 months. As Michael has pointed out, anti-Gypsyism is widespread, also in Ireland. In 2019, we also conducted our fundamental rights survey among the general population. And when we look to the Irish results, about 46% that said they would not feel comfortable to have a Roma as a neighbor. Was not specifically asked for travelers, but gives us an indication. Well, we also know that discrimination and experiences of harassment and victimization impacts on trust and trust in the institutions, and this is particularly low in Ireland. So when it comes to trust in police or judicial systems. However, we also can see that as it was already mentioned, that 28% reported the last incidents of discrimination in the last 5 years. We also heard about the significant gap in education between travelers and the general population. Well, the huge divide comes with the end of compulsory schooling, where many young travelers drop out early with at most junior cycle education in comparison to 5% in the general population. What is the reason that so many drop out? Well, we asked for that, and there are several reasons. Among others, there was resignation, having no job perspective, but also a major barrier to continue education could be that 27% of the parents said that their children experienced bullying and harassment at school. When it comes to employment, we heard that already. So there are several factors. Education is one, and of course discrimination reflected in very low employment rates. And the discrimination when looking for work is particularly high in Ireland, but also 12% reported that they were discriminated at their workplace in the last 12 months. And a major barrier seems also that 63% of Irish travelers do not have access to a bank account, compared to 6% of the population in Ireland in general. Many travelers in Ireland, they face precarious financial situations. 40% cannot make ends meet, and 31% cannot afford basic items such as proper food, heating, or paying their utility bills. And 1 in 10 traveler households said that in the last month, someone in the household went to bed hungry at least once. We also heard already that the situation with accommodation is problematic, that there are not sufficient number of halting places for travelers who are living in caravans or mobile homes. And we also heard that the discrimination rate is particularly high. Also, the housing situation itself is very precarious, whereas 24% face severe housing deprivation, which means living in overcrowded places with leaking roof, damp walls, no bath or no toilet, or no daylight or sufficient daylight in the accommodation. In comparison, this is only 2.5% in the general population in Ireland. While poverty and adverse housing conditions and unequal access to health also impacts on the health situation of Roma and travelers. You can see here that 29%, so almost every third, reports severe or limitations in daily activities, and people usually do due to a health problem. The general population in Ireland, where this number is 17%, so it's clearly higher. And we also heard that life expectancy is considerably below the general population, about the same for women and men, about 8 years below the general population. I presented today some of the main results. We have published a extensive report also with a lot of our recommendations, and I truly hope that these results will help to develop targeted action and response to the urgent needs travelers face in Ireland. And I would like to emphasize how important it is that we did this survey for the first time together with the travelers, and that we discuss it together, as this will be also key for the success of any future measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ursula. I must say, listening to you, I find it personally very worrying that nearly 40 years after, I find it very worrying personally that nearly 40 years after that survey undertaken by Micheál McGrail, which showed similar results, that nearly half the population wouldn't like to have a traveller as a neighbour. It points very much to the continuous nature of discrimination, and not just to the continuous nature of discrimination, unfortunately, but the continuous gap between naming the discrimination on one hand and measures to implement things to address it been successful on the other hand. Now, before I introduce Brigid Nevin, whom you will already have seen on your screen in the video that preceded Ursula's commentary, I would like to, in case now that you've seen the results, you'd like to share them, I'd like to remind you that the hashtag for today is Traveller Survey. And I'd also like to remind you that after the Minister has spoken a little later on, and after we've also heard from Martin Collins and from Sinead Gibney, the Chief Commissioner of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, there will be a short amount of time for some questions, which you're free to put now in the questions and answers, and we'll do the best we can to answer as many, or to amalgamate as many as we can into answers. Brigid Nevin is coordinator of the Traveller Primary Healthcare Project with Travact in Coolock, which is one of 25 primary healthcare projects around the country. Brigid has been involved in that work advocating for traveller health, including for the upcoming Traveller Health Action Plan, which is due to be published in early 2021. As well as being a lead researcher in this research, she was also a peer researcher on the All Ireland Traveller Health Study in 2009, which was a groundbreaking document with regard to traveller health. And currently, Brigid is studying for a professional degree in community work at Maynooth University. Brigid, it's over to you.
Hi, thanks Anastasia. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Brigid Nevin, and I was one of the peer researchers involved in the FRA survey in 2019. So just basically, I'm going to just give you an update. So just for anyone who doesn't know what peer researcher means, it means in this case, travellers talking to travellers. For marginalised groups like travellers, it is sometimes difficult to talk to people outside about your situation. You might be worried about what they will do with the information. There may be levels of shame or shyness in talking to a stranger. So by working with other travelling people, taking part in the survey, it helps us to have more trust, and we are more comfortable in this way, and we also get better information. We had previous experience of doing this, as Stacia said, in 2009 when we undertook the All Ireland Traveller Health Study, which was again a groundbreaking piece of work. About the FRA survey, doing the survey in 2019 was similar but different. The information had to be recorded and logged in a particular way, so we had to use tablets. This was a big step for a lot of travellers who would just be used to using phones and who often wouldn't have tablets or laptops. But the technology was great, and we were able to get the tablet to ask some of the questions as some of the traveller community health workers couldn't read or had poor literacy skills themselves. So this helped us along when we were doing it. On top of the map provided to us, we also had to map out our own area to ensure that we had a wide range of travellers so that we could get a good range of information to cover all aspects. Going out and asking the questions wasn't easy, as we had to call to some of the families on numerous occasions and try to arrange times with them that worked around their schedules. For example, picking up children from school and doing other personal things at home. Also, travellers' lives are quite stressful and things could happen all of a sudden. So you might have to actually call a few times before you'd actually get the survey done. The other thing that was hard was to persuade travellers that a survey was actually worth doing. Because we all had great hopes about the All Ireland Traveller Health Study. Again, we are still waiting on the Traveller Health Action Plan, which we hope will be very soon. While some changes come about in the last 10 years, there is still a huge gap between travellers' lives and the lives of the general population. And this is what the FRA survey shows. Travellers are losing heart that things will change for the better. And now with the COVID, things have been set back even further. Children are losing out on their education. The unemployment situation is getting worse. Still little progress in accommodation. Discrimination could be also said to be getting worse. Our big hope is that this survey will motivate politicians, civil servants and service providers into action. Travellers can do any job once we get the opportunity and the training. It is only when travellers get to participate can the traveller voice actually be heard. But to get these opportunities, we need people in the general population to take up our cause, as the EU FRA has done with this survey, in order to make our society equal for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brigid. And thank you also to all of the other peer researchers who joined with you in this important piece of research. It's now my very great honour to introduce Roderic O'Gorman, TD, who is the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. Minister, I know it's a long name, but believe very much that the seat at the table, at the cabinet table that you occupy, is a very important one to progress rights and equality across all dimensions of your brief. It's unique, and believe at this point in time, even although it's challenging, that it can make a difference for rights holders. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and stay with us this morning, and for the ongoing concern about travellers, that your presence here this morning, in spite of the challenging results to this survey, the ongoing concern about travellers that your presence here indicates. As you've heard, and as I've reiterated, the survey raises challenges, and indicates many more issues calling for action. We look forward very much to your response, Minister.
Thanks very much, Anastasia, and good morning to everybody. And look, I'm really pleased to be here at the launch of these survey results, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's participating in the webcast. I'd particularly like to thank Professor Michael Flaherty, to Ursula Till-Tentschert from the Fundamental Rights Agency, Sinead Gibney from IREC, Brigid Nevin, who was the peer researcher and just presented to us, and Martin Collins from Pavee Point. And look, I'd like to thank Anastasia and Pavee Point for organising the webinar today. I know we've all had to get used to working online and doing a lot of our presentations and launches online in this way, but it's still a fairly new form of working for us all, and things can go wrong. So look, thanks for bringing us all together to discuss these really important results. I've been asked maybe to talk a little bit about what we can learn from the survey, and particularly what the government is going to do in response to the survey. And I think our earlier speakers have really focused on the very significant degree of discrimination that travellers in Ireland still face, as is demonstrated and proved by the results from the survey. And as Brigid noted in her own press statement that was put out with these results, travellers already know these facts on the ground. They experience this discrimination on a daily basis. But I think when this degree of discrimination is presented to us in this particular way, it is a very stark reminder of the degree of discrimination that still exists in Irish society. So I suppose results like this demand an answer to the question, what are we doing, and what more can we do to tackle discrimination against travellers and Roma in Ireland? And what I can say to you is that I, as Minister, and this government, we are fully committed to improving the lives of the traveller and the Roma community in Ireland. I'd like to set out some of the ways in which we're working to address the systemic discrimination that's revealed in this survey, and some of the plans that we will be working on as part of the programme for government over the next number of years. And as you are aware, much of the work to support the traveller and Roma communities is done through the implementation and monitoring of the National Traveller and Roma Integration Strategy, which we generally refer to as NITRIS, which runs from 2017 to 2021. And the strategy works to bring together government departments and agencies and bring them together with representatives of traveller and Roma communities. And progress on the strategy is monitored by a steering committee, which again includes both traveller and Roma representatives and wider civil society organisations. And I was pleased to chair the most recent meeting of the steering committee on the 12th of November, and I'll continue to chair the meetings of the steering committee as Minister. The strategy demonstrates strong progress towards a fairer and more equal country. And in particular, there's been a number of notable milestones in Ireland in recent years that are indicative of change. And these include the formal recognition of traveller ethnicity in 2019, which was a landmark moment for traveller rights in Ireland, and one that was fought hard for many years. Under NITRIS, funding has been made available for traveller and Roma organisations to support their core activities and to progress specific commitments. In 2020, 3.8 million in funding was provided to support traveller and Roma inclusion, and in budget 2021 for next year, an additional 1 million will be granted, bringing a total to just under 5 million. And this funding is used to continue existing supports as well as support new activities designed to counteract the specific impacts of COVID-19 on the traveller and Roma communities. I think probably most of us will agree that one of the most disturbing findings from the report is that Ireland has the second highest rate of reported discrimination within the 6 countries surveyed. And as Minister for Equality, I'm absolutely committed to tackling racism and discrimination in all its forms. And we've already taken some steps as regards this, and we're pledged to doing more. The development of new legislation to deal with hate crime and incitement to hatred is a commitment contained within the programme for government, and the Department of Justice is working this as a priority to develop this legislation to ensure that Ireland is a safe and secure place for all. And furthermore, the Anti-Racism Committee, which was established in June 2019, it has a mandate to review current evidence and practice and make recommendations to government on how best to strengthen government's approach to tackling racism. The committee will continue to work, and its work will culminate in a draft national action plan against racism, which will be considered by myself and the government. And I'll be meeting with the Anti-Racism Committee before the end of the year to discuss its interim report. Alongside the high levels of discrimination, the report is also clear that travellers suffer from consistent levels of poverty and social exclusion. We're working to address this through the Roadmap for Social Inclusion 2020 to 2025, which was approved by government earlier this year with the aim of reducing the number of people in consistent poverty in Ireland and increasing social inclusion for the most disadvantaged. Implementation of this roadmap is being overseen by my party colleague, Minister Joe O'Brien. However, social exclusion doesn't exist in isolation. It's a function of access to the state's most basic services, education, employment, healthcare and housing. And as a government, we are taking steps to address these issues. With regard to employment, it's clear that unemployment is a significant issue for the traveller and Roma communities. And compared to other groups in other countries, Irish travellers are the least likely to have paid work. 17% of traveller women and 13% of traveller men have paid jobs, compared to 68% of settled women and 80% of settled men generally. And for this reason, a subgroup of NITRIS was informed, the NITRIS Employment Subgroup, and it was established to increase the focus on the 17 employment-related employment-related actions in NITRIS to address the extensive barriers and challenges that impact upon employment for the traveller and Roma communities. And annual funding is allocated for a special initiative for travellers, an initiative focusing on 7 locations nationwide with a view to coaching and assistance for travellers who are wishing to enter employment. The initiative retains its original objective of providing traveller support workers and assistance for employment and enterprise development. And as part of the successor strategy to NITRIS, the programme for government also contains a commitment to develop a comprehensive traveller and Roma employment and enterprise plan. And I will be working with colleagues across government to progress this commitment. As Minister for Children, I was particularly struck by that statistic that says 75% of traveller children aged 4 or 5 are in early childhood education, compared to almost 100% of children within the general population. Education is a building block on which so much else rests. And work needs to continue on keeping traveller children in education from the youngest age in an environment where they feel valued and supported. With early learning and school-age childcare falling within my remit, I want to examine what more can be done to improve access to early childhood education for traveller children. The government has committed to developing a national traveller education strategy, including a plan to improve access to higher education for members of the traveller community and further development of access programmes. And this is something I've discussed with the Minister for Higher and Further Education, Minister Simon Harris. An education subgroup has also been established under NITRIS to improve access, participation and educational outcomes for traveller and Roma children. And a key part of this is a number of pilot education programmes that are running for 2 years across the country in 4 separate locations. And these trial a new approach to addressing barriers to education in traveller and Roma communities regionally. And it's hoped that these pilot programmes will inform the development of a sustainable programme to address the gap in educational outcomes for children and young people from the traveller and Roma communities. Looking at healthcare, I think it's really dismaying that the life expectancy of traveller and Roma remains lower than that of the general population across the country surveyed. And this difference in life expectancy, alongside the appallingly high suicide rates within the traveller and Roma communities, is perhaps one of the most shocking illustrations of inequality that are revealed by this survey. And I know that the Department of Health, in conjunction with the HSE, it supports a range of targeted initiatives, programmes and supports to improve the health status of traveller and Roma. And funding in the region of 10 million a year is provided for these HSE initiatives, targeted at improving health outcomes for the travelling community, including including primary healthcare projects, counselling, public health nurses, mental health promotion, and culturally sensitive suicide awareness programs. However, it is very clear that more needs to be done. And the programme for government commits to improving in-reach into traveller communities and the creation of a traveller and Roma mental health action plan to address the devastating impact of poor mental health and lack of appropriate services for the traveller and Roma communities. I think one of the really clear statistics from the survey was that 92% of respondents stated there was not enough places, especially traveller-specific accommodation for them to live, and so progress is badly needed on the provision of appropriate accommodation for travellers. And as many of you will be aware, the National Traveller Accommodation Consultative Committee was set up under the Housing Traveller Accommodation Act of 1998 to advise the Minister for Housing about improving consultation with and the participation of travellers in the provision and management of accommodation. And the report of the expert group to review the effectiveness and the implementation and the operation of the Traveller Accommodation Act was published in July of 2019. And the report contains 32 recommendations, and the Minister for Housing is working on the establishment of a programme of projects that will drive forward implementation of the recommendations. And I look forward to working with the Minister for Housing to progressing the implementation of those recommendations. And these policies that are, and initiatives that I've outlined there, they are some of what the government has put in place to support the traveller and Roma communities. And I do hope they give an indication of this government's commitment to this issue. Because the report today, it shows us the scale of the issues that we as a government and indeed we as a society face. And it's clear that a more coordinated approach is needed across government departments in order to address the challenges and the very real discrimination that the traveller community continues to face on a daily basis. And I'm committed to working with the travelling community, with government departments, with NGOs and agencies to address these issues. The aim is not just to narrow the gap of discrimination, but to actually eliminate it. Nothing else will do. And this isn't just a matter for government, though. It's an issue for all of society. Every citizen has a role to play. Families, communities, the media, schools, colleges, employers. Although legislation exists, discrimination persists. And I hope we can create a better future for Ireland where all communities, including the traveller community, feel safe and valued and included. So I want to thank you for your attendance today. I look forward to further engagement with you in the questions and answer session, but more importantly, I look forward to continued engagement and cooperation in the ongoing fight to end discrimination against our traveller and Roma communities. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm sure I share with many the concerns that you've raised, but I'm sure I also share with many a concern that the implementation of the initiatives that you've spoken to, that you will be able to continue and to ensure that that happens. I'm conscious of the time and conscious that there are many people who want to engage in dialogue with both our Fundamental Rights Agency friends and also with the Minister and the other panelists. So I'm going to now invite our colleagues to show a short message from Chief Commissioner of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, Sinead Gibney. Previously, Sinead of the Commission, and she has also led Google Ireland's corporate social responsibility function, as well as fulfilling a number of roles in a variety of civil society organisations. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to contribute to today's discussion on the rights and living conditions of travellers in Ireland, which, as this important and timely survey highlights, sees massive inequality in people's treatment and access to suitable services. I'd like to begin by quoting the late Nan Joyce, pioneering human rights activist. Just because we lived in the dirt and the rats and the filth, people thought we wanted to live in it. You know, leave them there and let them rot. We don't want this. Nan put herself forward as the first traveller to stand for election in 1982, and this year we celebrated the first traveller elected representative in Senator Eileen Nealon, a huge milestone. We've also seen the state move from a policy of assimilation to traveller ethnicity and cultural recognition in 2017. But how do we measure if life is getting meaningfully better for travellers and their children growing up in Ireland today? As this survey so pointedly illustrates, Irish travellers fare far worse in a range of areas than their European counterparts. At 65%, overall discrimination among Irish travellers is one of the highest among all survey groups from the different countries. And sadly, many of these surveys findings will come as no surprise to travellers in Ireland. There is a demonstrable history of chronic racism and discrimination against the traveller community in Ireland, as reflected in our own research findings. So how is the state going to ensure lasting change and respect? Well, the benchmarks provided in this very first survey of its type are significant. The better data we have on discrimination experienced by the traveller community, the more effective the legislative policy and practical measures taken to address it will be. This evidence base should inform the decision-making of government, public bodies and agencies, with travellers and Roma directly and meaningfully participating in that decision-making. In June 2019, the Commission invited each of Ireland's 31 city and county councils to undertake a review of their provision of traveller accommodation, a legal analysis of which is now underway. And we've recommended that the state introduce dissuasive sanctions for local authorities who fail to provide traveller-specific and culturally appropriate accommodation. While Roma were not part of this survey in Ireland, we need to ensure a continued focus on the Roma community who have specific human rights and equality needs. Last month, I met with representatives of the community to hear about the challenges they face, particularly with the added pressure brought about by the pandemic. I conclude with a call for improved equality data collection across government and public bodies in Ireland, and specifically to use the Census 2021 deferred to 22 to ensure this data contributes to effective policy making and substantial change for the traveller community. The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission remains committed to assisting the traveller and Roma communities to vindicate their rights with full expectation that they and their children will have the equal outcomes, dignity and treatment in life that are rightfully theirs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sinead. Our last speaker for this morning before we go, and it will be briefly, I'm afraid, to the questions and answers, is Martin Collins, co-director of Pavee Point Traveller and Roma Centre. Martin is well known to many of you for his courage and commitment and leadership of the traveller community, and for the way in which he has consistently and persistently sought to address discrimination and racism faced by his community. Martin has been a very strong advocate for state recognition of traveller ethnicity, which took place in 2017. And he was also a member of the Human Rights Commissioner between 2002 and 2007. And at a European level, he's currently a member of the Advisory Committee for the Council of Europe Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities. Martin. Hello?
Hey, Brigid, can you help me? Hello? Naroon?
Martin, we can hear you now.
Hi, Martin. If you can just start your video down at the bottom.
Okay. My apology for that. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm really sorry about that. Thank you very much, Stacia, and good morning, everybody. Quite clearly, the report that's been launched here this morning lays bare one more time the ongoing systemic racism and exclusion that travellers experience in Irish society. But it's also shocking, of course, and it really is important that we stay shocked, because otherwise we become very, how would you say, desensitized to these really important issues, which are essentially human rights violations. One of the unique features of the research was the very positive and effective partnership approach between Ipsos, MBRI, local traveller organisations, and of course Pavee Point, who played a national coordinating role. This was absolutely crucial to the research and the quality of the research, as it was a traveller infrastructure that did facilitate an access and a reach into the community that quite simply nobody else could do. This approach also contributed to a more robust, reliable data, and it also gives the community a sense of ownership over the research. There were a number of tasks which contributed to this very positive and effective collaboration. First of all, Pavee Point facilitated a day-long cultural awareness anti-racism training session for the Ipsos interviewers, and the purpose here was obviously to try and break down any barriers or misconceptions Ipsos interviewers would have, and this also contributed to developing a more positive and relationship and one of trust between Ipsos, Pavee Point, and indeed local traveller organisations. In turn, Ipsos trained over, well, in fact, almost 40 travellers in data collection technology. So it was a mutually beneficial collaboration. So essentially, it's really important that travellers, at all stages, design, implementation, and evaluation, not just of research, but indeed any policy initiatives, any programs, or any projects related to our community. It really is essential that we are central to that process, the beginning, the middle, and the end, as it were. And this is the gold standard that I think we need to be setting ourselves. And while the report itself doesn't deal with culture, identity, or history of our people, I don't think the rights in the other areas of accommodation, education, employment, and health can be fully realised unless there's a more robust affirmation and recognition of traveller culture and identity and history, and that being reflected within the school curriculum. It also being reflected in our mainstream institutions, our cultural institutions, and our museums. On the 1st of March 2017, we got that symbolic recognition of our identity, but we need more action in this area where traveller identity is much more visible and affirmed, as I say, in our mainstream institutions, but particularly in schools. And if traveller identity and culture was to be affirmed in the schools, I think that would certainly, it wouldn't be a panacea, but I certainly think it would make more of a very important contribution to the retention of travellers in our education system at all levels. And then finally, Stacia, can I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of the traveller organisations right across the country who played really a vital role in this, in the production of this research. It really couldn't have happened without the traveller infrastructure, and I want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge the contribution of FRA, in particular Ursula, Yaroslav, and Thomas, who we've been liaising with for quite some time. And then finally, also want to thank Ipsos, who, when we put to them that we want this to be a partnership approach between our traveller organisations and themselves, they were quite receptive to that, and we see the results of that here this morning. But finally, I want to say we've had many false dawns before. We've had many reports and strategies. Really, now it is time for action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And thank you all for your patience. And I'm afraid we're going to have a rather restricted question and answer session. But first of all, a question for Michael O'Flaherty, followed then by some questions for the Minister. Michael, in your experience, do you think that ethnic equality monitoring using an ethnic identifier to get up-to-date disaggregated data could help in the implementation of the survey findings? And as you will know, disaggregated data is one of the key things that all of the treaty bodies of the UN systematically recommend. So, Michael, what do you think?
Well, Anastasia, it'll come as no surprise that the answer is yes. I think it's critically important. On the basis of self-identification, obviously, this is really that's the other side of the coin, it's resisted by some EU member states, and I have a lot of sympathy for the historic reasons for the resistance, because in the tragic history of Europe, despots used ethnically disaggregated data to do terrible things. But we're well past that now. We have data protection, we have the GDPR, we're able to ensure privacy of data to an extent that addresses most of the concerns. So we're left with, again, in some parts of the EU, almost like a sort of a cultural resistance to the idea of gathering ethnically disaggregated data. That's holding us back. If we don't know about a problem, we can't fix a problem. It's as simple as that. And so this is one of the really important rollouts from the recognition of ethnicity in Ireland. It meant that if such data is gathered systematically, then we can specifically point to the experience of travellers as distinct to any other marginalised group. The Fundamental Rights Agency is working hard with member states to more systematically engage on this issue, because it's not just about gathering the data, it's then acting on it. Where a lot of work is needed as well. But I suspect I'm in complete agreement with you, Anastasia, in the way you just cited the UN treaty bodies who take an identical position.
Thank you very much, Michael. And that question came from Donegal Travellers Project. There are a number of questions for you, Minister, which I'm sure you would be aware of. First of all, Eilish Barry from the Free Legal Aid Centres is asking about the third recommendations to extend the third recommendations in the review of Ireland, which took place last year in December 2019. The third recommendations to extend legal aid to discrimination and housing claims on one hand, and then on the other hand to extend the equal status legislation to bring an Garda Síochána within its prohibition of discrimination provisions. Those are two from Eilish. And then Shane O'Curry from Irish Network Against Racism has been asking about whether you would support, and I'm listening to your remarks, I'm sure you do, but whether you would support integration of the report's recommendations into other departmental concerns to address discrimination. For example, I'll name one myself, the forthcoming Traveller Health Action Plan, and whether you would also ensure that these recommendations are actively included, if the rest don't actually manage to do it, if these recommendations are actively included in the forthcoming National Action Plan Against Racism. And while I'm mentioning it, Jimmy Todds from the Midlands HSE has a particular concern and has raised questions about how the Traveller Health Action Plan might be implemented. And while you're at it, I think overall there have been some questions asked also, building on your very positive and courageous response to what you've heard, how you might see the implementation of the survey results being led out on in Ireland, and whether you think a particular agency or a particular individual might be needed in that regard, acknowledging the current existence of the NITRAs and of the associated committees, but acknowledging also that what's been possible up to now hasn't reached the level of implementation that you yourself would desire. Thank you. Sorry, I gave them all to you at once, I know.
That's a list there. Look, I'll maybe come to Eilish's question first, and I suppose the issue as regards legal aid, that's probably an issue for my colleague, the Minister for Justice, but I'm certainly happy to engage with her on that, and I know it's an issue that Eilish and her team have flagged. As regards the application of the Equal Status Act, I would be hopeful within my term of minister to undertake a detailed review of the equality legislation in the country. We've very good equality legislation in this country, but it's around for a while now at this stage. And I think even where legislation is working well, it's always good to keep it under review and update it. There are 2 commitments within the programme for government as regards specific updates to equality legislation, looking at discrimination on socio-economic grounds and looking at discrimination on the grounds of trans status. So they're explicit commitments in the programme for government, but I'd like to see a broader review of equality legislation, both in terms, I suppose, of its substantive application, but I think with that we could include the bodies to which it applies, and I think we have a real opportunity there to look at expanding out its application to other state bodies and agencies, including An Garda Síochána, and I think that would tie in well with the significant range of reforms that are happening to An Garda Síochána in the context of the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland. As regards Shane's point on linking in the results here with other pieces of work that's ongoing, I think that's important. As you know, the NITRIS will run for 1 more year. It'll run to the end of 2021. But as we come to the end of 2021, and it was something I flagged up in the meeting earlier in November, where I was chairing it. That was my first meeting, and as a new minister, I'm still just getting my sense of how the NITRIS works, and particularly how the steering committee works, and how we can improve it. But we'll be looking at a successor strategy, and we'll be looking at devising that next year. And that successor strategy will be very much influenced by the statistics and the findings of this report. And I think the successor strategy will also be influenced heavily by the commitments, the kind of area-specific commitments in the programme for government. So an action plan for travellers in the context of health, an action plan in the context of employment and entrepreneurship, and an action plan in the context of education as well. But I also think the findings are going to be very relevant to the report of the Anti-Discrimination Committee and the Anti-Racism Committee and the Anti-Racism Action Plan, which will be brought forward next year. The Anti-Racism Committee have undertaken an interim report. I'll be meeting with them on that hopefully before Christmas, and I'll specifically draw their attention to this report. I'm sure they're well aware of it already, but I will specifically draw their attention to this and ask that they consider the results of this report in the context of their ongoing work. The plan is that by September of next year, a new national anti-racism plan will have been brought to government for government approval. I think that's hugely important because it's been the last national anti-racism plan expired in 2008. So for far too long, we've been without a national strategy on this issue, and I'm looking forward to being the minister to bring one forward. Excuse me. There was a specific question there about the Traveller Health Action Plan, and I think how I would see those work is in the context of drawing on the objectives contained within the current NITRIS and its successor strategy, but teasing out in more detail, because I suppose the NITRIS is, for those of you and many people on the call here are involved in NITRIS, and we know we have our kind of our table, our Excel table with, you know, completed, partially complete, more to do, etc. Whereas I think a health action plan would take those points to do with health, and of which there are a significant number, and tease out in more detail exactly what's happening, exactly which part of government infrastructure. Is it the HSE? Is it the Department of Health? Is it some subgroup that are responsible? But also teasing out what are the barriers. Is it a funding barrier? Is it a legislative barrier? Is it policy barriers? And clearly setting out what we're trying to achieve. But I think also a greater focus on outcomes as well, because I think one of the things that we've missed in the NITRIS is a lack of kind of outcomes focused reporting. And I think that's significant, particularly when we see percentages of discrimination, percentages of lack of people unable to access employment, percentages of children not in full-time education. And it's only when we see those percentages go in the right direction that we can feel that our various strategies are actually having an impact. And finally, Anastasia, maybe just to answer kind of the more macro point about how do we ensure this will be done. I'd like to think that, you know, this time we have a senior minister chairing the NITRIS, and I think that perhaps gives a greater degree of coordination with what's happening with other cabinet colleagues. And it gives me an indication when I see a set of outcomes maybe in one particular department that aren't being met, it gives me the authority to go to another cabinet minister and say, in fairness, we're not getting delivery from your department in a number of areas. Can we look at how we can actually improve that? I think another thing that helps is that the range of equality and human rights bodies, of independent monitoring and implementation bodies that are out there continues to grow. So we're now in a situation where we have at an EU level the Fundamental Rights Agency, at a national agency we have IREC, we have the Children's Ombudsman, we have the Ombudsman, and we have all those bodies who are there putting pressure on government and on state agencies to deliver more. And I know, again, in my department, in the context of direct provision, I've had a range of these independent monitoring bodies make reports in the last number of months setting out something which I think we all know already, that direct provision is unfit for purpose and needs to be replaced. And I would hope that we will see that coordinated approach from our human rights monitoring bodies as well as regards the very systemic discrimination that travellers continue to face. And I believe that external pressure combined with a programme for government that makes very clear commitments as regards making changes, making positive changes for the traveller and Roma community, and hopefully a minister and a department that is very much committed to that. I believe we can see much greater achievement of the various outcomes across all the areas where discrimination is faced over the next number of years.
Thank you very much, Minister, and we indeed thank you very much, Minister. I hope everybody can hear me now. Thank you very much, Minister, and we indeed share your positive remark with regard to having a senior minister at the cabinet table concerned about these and all the other issues we spoke about, and look forward to working on you to make progress on them. Now, I have a number of questions and I want to move very rapidly to them. Some questions, first of all, for Ursula, then a short question for Brigid, followed by another question which I think might be useful to take, particularly given what you've said, Michael, or you've said, Minister, from Michael O'Flaherty, and then some questions for Martin Collins, just so you know how many people we have to try to manage before I go back then maybe to the Minister at least, and Michael for some closing remarks. Now, Ursula, there have been a number of questions to yourself. First of all, a question from Fran McGinnity in the SRI, will the data be available for further research purposes here? And first of all, and then secondly, what have you learned about peer researching from this particular piece of work? Also, an associated question, and I'll ask them all just right now to you, Ursula, from Thomas McCann of the National Traveller Mental Health Network, which is about whether questions about mental health and mental health issues for travellers were actually asked as part of this survey, and in a more broader context, expressing some concern about the extent to which those questions are part of FRA's survey work or part of the work that FRA undertakes overall. So I'll leave those to you, Ursula, just now.
Okay. I try to be short. Data, yes, they will be available, but I cannot say when. We are working on that. So it will take another year probably. We have to go through a complex process of data anonymization. And yes, we do and have to make sure that no one can be identified. So there will be a point in time where we release the data. We are working on that. Then what we learned from the peer research, well, I think it was said several times today that it was crucial It was crucial that we did this together with the travelers. Otherwise, we could have not reached out and we would have not reached the quality we have. So it is crucial, and it is an example of what we already try to implement for years now, the human rights principle in data collections, which are self-identification and which is participation. And participation doesn't always mean that we have traveler interviews in every survey, but also there was the question on ethnic identifier. It's really to consult and discuss together with the communities how an ethnic identifier should look like, and how the question is posed. So not to forget, whenever we try to find something out about the group, to do it together with the Roma and the travelers in this regard. So that's very important. And so the work we had, it just confirmed what our approach was, and we were very happy. It was mentioned in particular on the excellent training, the Ipsos interviews received on cultural awareness. And this is something we will also take to our other trainings, because it was so well done, and try to encourage the other countries to do it the same. And I would be also happy if we could have further cooperation on that, how we can spread that sort of training to all the countries. When it comes to mental health, no, we didn't ask on mental health. I agree, it's very important. However, the survey was already very long, and it was not possible to add any further questions. And we have to also cover all the questions which have to be comparable, the EU indicators. And I can only encourage when you set up your own survey, which we support that all countries do, and which is foreseen in the new EU strategic framework, that all countries have a monitoring system in place, that such questions are included also for children, of course, as it is done already in the mixed survey by UNICEF. I hope that were all the questions I've answered now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ursula. And a follow-up question then for Brigid Nevin. Brigid, when you were, from Amanda Haynes, when you were speaking, you spoke about some people being a bit reluctant to participate, but then participating when after then being willing to participate afterwards because of your engagement or involvement. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and why you feel they were willing to actually participate due to your involvement?
Thanks, Stacia. Yeah, well, it was quite difficult at the beginning to actually get travellers to participate in the questionnaire and in the survey, because travellers have been answering surveys and participating in surveys for I don't know how long, and we're not really seeing much change happening for us. I think what actually helped us this time around was, first of all, the fact that it was travellers asking the questions to travellers, and we were able to basically talk to each other in an understanding way. But we also, as peer researchers, used the fact that this was at a European level and that the findings would be highlighted at this level. So using that, we actually told the travellers, and I hope I didn't overstep the line, that change is coming. So I hope that all the people that sees the results of the findings from this survey do put the changes in place for the traveller and Roma community. So it may not be as easy the next time around to actually persuade them to participate if there's no change from this one, and because it is at the European level. So that was basically it, Stacia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brigid. Martin, very rapidly to you. I hope everybody can see me. I'm presuming that you can. Martin, very, very rapidly to you. Two quick questions, I'm afraid, and they're very long answers. But first of all, how do you think the issues outlined in the research deny and somewhat cover up or mask traveller culture, and what can be done about that, in your opinion? And looking forward then to the next decade and to the EU Roma strategic framework for equality, inclusion and participation 2020 to 2030, what do you see as the relevance of that for implementation of the survey results?
Well, to take your last question first, Stacia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. That has always been the biggest challenge, you know, is actually implementation. It's not such a big problem or an issue doing the research, get the findings, make the recommendations, but I think we're all challenged when it comes to implementation. And Brigid is absolutely right. When travellers don't see any concrete change on the ground, then people just, get very fatigued and despair when they don't see any significant change. So really, it's a problem of implementation and an issue of political leadership and accountability. So we need political leadership, and we need courage, and we need accountability in terms of having some institutional mechanisms that would be mandated to implement recommendations in whether it's the successor to NITRIS or indeed the findings of this study, if it makes its way into the National Action Plan Against Racism and indeed the successor to NITRIS. So yeah, I think if you ask anybody out there, they would say that's the biggest challenge. The key issue one of the key issues for me, Stacia, and I think Michael alluded to it and others alluded to it as well, and it was in the video clip as well, and that is respect for culture, respect for identity, and respect for history. And, as I said, we have a long way to go yet before traveller identity is fully valued and respected by the Irish state. And we need to see traveller identity and culture being more visible and affirmed within our school curriculum, in the textbooks and so forth. This has happened for other national minorities in other parts of Europe, where their culture, history and identity is validated and affirmed in the school curriculum. And I cannot really emphasize that enough, for a young traveller child in the classroom, if their identity is being affirmed and validated, it has a huge, profound impact on their confidence and their self-esteem, and I think would make a huge contribution to them progressing within the education system. So I don't think the rights can be fully realised in the other areas in terms of education, accommodation, health. I think central to all of that, and what should inform all of that, is a very clear and a very unambiguous and unequivocal validation of our history, our culture and our identity. We got a symbolic recognition on the 1st of March, and we welcome that, of course, but more needs to follow.
Sorry about that, everybody. There's some little delay here. My apologies. Can you see me and hear me now? I hope you can. Michael O'Flaherty, a very brief question for you. What experience with regard, and it follows up on that question with regard to implementation, what experience can FRA bring to that table with regard to implementation? What has FRA any plans to build capacity or push for implementation of the report recommendations?
Anastasia, just before I answer that, because I guess this is my last chance to speak, I just want to thank all the speakers. It was really great, the different contributions. Martin Collins, I want to 100% associate myself with his remarks on culture just now. I want to say to Brigid that I hear her about the challenge that we have to deliver, all of us together, if travellers are going to cooperate in the future. I want to thank the Minister for his very powerful words of solidarity, but also for the fact that the Irish government has put this responsibility at the cabinet table. And I agree that that can make a sea change. Now, to your question, Anastasia, At the agency, we will continue the survey work. We will repeat this survey periodically, so it's not just one-off. We need to be able to measure changes over time. We will continue, but that's not the only stuff we do. We also, for example, in the area of Roma and traveller empowerment, do qualitative research. We did an extensive project looking at the village situation in multiple EU countries a couple of years back, and we're still learning from that work in terms of providing advice to Roma and traveller and to the States. We do capacity building programs very extensively across the EU. We do them with governments, we do them with civil society, we do them with the national human rights bodies and the equality bodies. And we will look at how we can ratchet up our commitment in the specific context of working with Roma and travellers. So you can count on the agency to stay very focused on this, not just gathering the data, but seeking to be part of the solution also.
Thank you very much, Michael. And now, before I wrap up, I would like to go back to the Minister O'Gorman, and give him an opportunity to share some final comments, please. And that question, by the way, Michael, came from Fintan Farrell, who for many years has been working at a European level on social inclusion and equality issues.
Thanks very much, Anastasia. Well, look, I suppose the report today has kind of given us stark statistics around what, as I said earlier on, what travellers on a day-to-day basis know already, what they experience in their lives. And I think perhaps the scale, if there's anything that shocks those of us in the settled community who don't have that day-to-day experience, it's not the existence of discrimination, but it's the sheer scale and the magnitude, particularly in areas like housing, like health, like education, where the scale of discrimination and the scale of disadvantage has really been highlighted by the figures presented today. When I think Martin was speaking on the radio this morning, and I heard him as I was coming in, and he highlighted the fact that what this survey is not only gives us an indication of what's happening here in Ireland, but it allows us to compare with the 5 other countries, and it allows us show in many of the categories how we are falling well behind those countries as well. So I think what this survey does is puts it up to all of us across society, across NGOs, but particularly it puts it up to the incoming government and myself as minister. And we've got a programme for government. I feel it's one that does demonstrate a clear commitment and a clear recognition that the traveller and Roma community have faced systemic discrimination, and the government recognises this and is proposing measures to address this. But I know, and I think it's Brigid made that point, that travellers won't believe words until they see actions, until they see delivery, until they see actual improvements in their own standard of living across all of these areas. And that's the job for me as minister. It's the job for the department. It's not an easy job. I don't underestimate the scale, but I do think with the determination that's there in the government and in the various NGOs and state organisations and agencies, all of whom are committed to achieving these goals of equality for the traveller and Roma community, I do think we can make significant advances over the next number of years, and I'm certainly committed to doing so.
Thank you very much, Minister. And in thanking you both for your closing remarks and for being with us this morning, can I also thank all of the panelists and all of the people who have participated today. Thank you very much to many of you who have sent in questions that we weren't able to answer, but we will endeavour to actually answer these in writing if we can at a later stage. Thank you to those of you who have provided us with information, for example, information about the Traveller NABS report, which will be launched next week, on accessing financial services, and on Owen Bardoon's book, Why the Moon Travels, which is recommended as a really good Christmas present. Thank you for all of the good wishes, and I'm conscious that other people have provided us with information other than the people I'm able to speak to at the moment. Thank you for the good wishes from Community Work Ireland, from Pobble, from the Wexlow Traveller Health Programme, and from all of the rest of you whom I haven't been able to mention. It seems to me that this morning, as Michael said at the very outset, we have heard grim findings of discrimination and of a need for much more robust implementation of provisions to alleviate the discrimination, to address and to eliminate the discrimination and racism experienced by travellers in every walk of their life in this country. But we've also heard very clearly about a restated agenda with a minister, a senior government minister at the cabinet table. So we can look to maybe a situation where even in this difficult time that there is a moment where change can be brought and where some progress can be made. Minister and all of you, I look forward to working with you to ensure that at least some of that change is possible by the next time we gather in this sort of a room, maybe this time next year or even before that. And finally, thank you to all of you who succeeded in this not being a really difficult morning with all sorts of technology going wrong. Thank you for all of that. I'm very conscious of the stress it puts all of us under, especially people like me who didn't grow up, which is like a lot of you did. Thank you, and thank you to 111 people even now for staying with us up until this time. Good morning and have a good day.